Hey, thanks so much for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm meteorologist Bianchi, and today is a unique day. We are, as meteorologists, with my colleague here, meteorologist Cory Reppenhagen, going to chat about the Farmers Almanac. Now, the Farmers Almanac is predicting a cold and snowy winter for Colorado. The Farmers Almanac also is transparently not a particularly reliable source for weather information. We're going to get into that and what the actual outlook will be for this upcoming winter. But first things first, Cory, you've got a bit more firsthand experience with the Farmers Almanac than most of us, myself included, out there because you've spoken with the editor of the Almanac several times. So what do you make of the Farmers Almanac prediction of a cold and snowy winter for Colorado?
Well, yeah, it's always interesting, and they have just a huge following, right? Because so many people look forward to getting that yearly prediction of, especially the winter in the Farmers Almanac, and so they have a huge following. And Peter Geiger is the editor, who I've interviewed several times, trying to get him to tell me what their secret formula is, right, to do these weather forecasts. And a lot of times, the perception is that the Farmers Almanac actually has a very good track record, right? Because a lot of times they are predicting it to be cold and for there to be snow in the winter. And every winter I've ever known, it gets cold and it snows. So technically, they're a good source, but they actually break it down into some storm systems and some specific dates. So it's really popular, and I am one of those that I like to keep a very open mind to everything, and I'm not really ready to discredit anything that these guys do because it is a science on another level. So basically what they do, their forecast, their weather prognostications are based on the sun, solar activity, sunspot activity, the moon, planetary positions, things like that. And there are some things to do with that, right? I mean, if you really want to depend on a weather forecast, I would say maybe somebody who is more of an atmospheric science expert would probably be your go-to there, because weather, as we know, has a lot to do with atmosphere, right? But some time back, 150 years ago, even longer, some scientists found a correlation between sunspot activity and the activity of the sun and the position of the moon, and they correlated that with some weather that they were experiencing, and they came up with this formula. And take it or leave it, I mean, sometimes it, maybe if you compared it to our weather forecasts, we might be a little bit ahead of that, but weather is not easy to predict, especially that far in advance. So really just to say it's going to be cold and snowy is really what we expect for a winter situation. So I really think that it's interesting with when you look at solar activity. So one thing that we know as scientists, that the sun does fluctuate its activity. So it goes through this 11-year cycle where it puts out more energy and then less energy in a minimum. But because of the way our atmosphere works, almost the same amount of energy reaches the Earth, no matter what phase or strength the sun is in. So a lot of people have this misconception that it's the solar energy, this radiation coming from the sun, fluctuating and changing the weather. We know as scientists that that does not work. That is not how it works. But there are some papers out there, and I talked to Scott McIntosh, the deputy director of NCAR. He once published a paper that showed that you have to kind of think outside the box when you're talking about the sun and the way it affects the planet. And when the sun is in an active phase, so we're going into solar maximum now, and the sun's activity will increase. What it does is that energy shields the Earth from cosmic rays that come in from outer space. And we don't know what the impact of cosmic rays are on our atmosphere and our weather, but we're always being bombarded by these, and we don't know how that impacts our weather. So there's so many things out there that beyond the atmosphere and the oceanic circulations that we use, that could have an impact on our weather. So I'm not one of those guys that's going to completely discredit the predictions or the prognostications, what they call it, at the Farmers Almanac. So I think there's a science basis behind it. It's not atmosphere related, but it's a little different. And I might be a little biased, Chris, because I happen to love the Farmers Almanac. There's so much information in there. It's all about life hacks, really, about how you can be environmental friendly, be healthy, and community oriented. There's really, I mean, there's 150, 200 pages in the book, and their weather forecast is 10 pages. So it's the weather forecast is not really what they do. So it's just one of those things where you're either a fan of the Farmer's Almanac or you are skeptical of the way they put together their weather forecasts.
A lot of information there to break down. I will say this though, Cory, it wasn't that they said, and by the way, you are exceptionally nice and open-minded. I'm going to be a bit more cynical. I am originally from the East Coast, so maybe that's what kicks in here. But let me say this too. This is what they said about Colorado in the winter. They said, quote, Colorado will be in the hibernation zone. It'll be, quote, glacial and snow-filled. So I do say that it goes a little beyond just cold and snowy. Glacial, hibernation zone. Do you buy it? Do you, on a serious note, actually put any sort of stock into that when you start thinking about the upcoming winter?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing about weather, and it's all about perception, right? I mean, we could have 2 months of 70-degree weather in December and January, and then we have one cold snap that's -10 for 5 days, and that's the one that people remember. So it's perception. I mean, we're going to have our ups and downs in the winter, like we always do. And the NOAA forecast can be just as easily as misconceived, because they don't have a winter forecast out yet, but they have their fall outcast, which is for well above average temperatures and low precipitation. And I suspect with the ongoing La Nina, that the winter forecast will be similar. So when people see the NOAA forecast, they see the big red circle over Colorado, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's going to be hot this winter. Well, it's not going to be hot. It's going to be warmer than average. And our average temperature in the winter in Denver is like 34 degrees. So 35 would be a full degree above average. So it's all perception, it's just that. And when you're doing a forecast so long in advance, by the time you're experiencing the winter, you almost feel like your perception is one way or the other. You're going to remember that 1 week where we had 70 degrees every day, or the 1 week where we were -10, or the one storm that is a 2-footer. These things, it's all perception, I think.
All right. So you alluded to some of those bits of more actual atmospheric science and meteorology there. With that said, with the CPC outlook that you mentioned, which calls for a warmer than average fall, often that fall can lead into winter. What do you see happening for this upcoming winter?
Well, I mean, I see NOAA's forecast being pretty much spot on, honestly, with the what they're saying about the next 3 months, and it's La Nina driven is what I'm thinking. We have this unprecedented. I think it's only the second or third time we've ever had a triple back-to-back La Nina, and historically, I mean, it's not a lot of data, but it does show you that it continues to be warmer and drier into the winter months. So I really feel like that is a scenario that's going to play out. And on that topic, it's interesting, and this could be a very interesting story that we could work on with the Farmers Almanac this year, perhaps, because the last time I talked to Peter Geiger, the editor of Farmers Almanac, he said that climate change has had a major impact on his publication, major impact, not only because of all the life hacks that people need now on a changing climate to really get through their lives in a better way, but it's also impacted their weather prognostication, because the weather used to be a lot more reliable. When you say it's going to be hibernation zone and glacial in the winter, it's a good chance, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, that was the case. But now, he told me something very interesting the last time I talked to him, and he is maybe considering maybe even changing their formula to add some oceanic oscillations into it, just because of the way the climate is evolving and the knowledge that the everyday person has about weather. We know that the oceanic circulations have a huge impact on winter weather, specifically when we're talking about the El Nino southern oscillation, where the Pacific decadal, the Madden-Julian oscillation that circles here, all these oceanic driven circulations, we know now have such a huge teleconnection to the actual weather that plays out in the wintertime. And so he said that after 160 some years of the same sun activity, lunar formula, that they may consider putting some oceanic condition information in there, which would be groundbreaking, I think.
I wonder if that would alter their forecast also.
Yeah, you would think it would have an impact. I mean, because we don't know, because we don't really know how they utilize the sunspot activity and the association. But if they were to see, if they did the same thing with historic sunspot records that we do with oceanic temperatures and oscillations, they'll see the same correlation that we see. And that, when we have a La Nina phase with a negative Pacific decadal, or when we have these matching teleconnections equaling warmer and drier winter weather, you would think it would have an impact on their prognostications as well.
Interesting. Well, I guess that the Farmers Almanac and the NOAA forecasts are slightly divergent. Sounds like yours as well, Cory. Sounds like you're leaning towards the warmer, drier solution, that a third straight La Nina. By the way, for our viewers out there, La Nina is the cooler than average cycle of Central Pacific Ocean temperatures, tends to lead to drier and warmer conditions for the southwestern United States, especially for southern Colorado, though it can be hit or miss, particularly for northern Colorado. But that said, Cory, I guess with that clash in forecasts, any final thoughts on both the Farmers Almanac outlook as well as what we could be looking at for this upcoming winter?
Well, this one is interesting just because of how very different they are. We're kind of anticipating NOAA following suit with their fall forecast into the winter, which most likely will be because they utilize the oceanic circulations to a heavy extent in those forecasts. So I think we will see a pretty big discrepancy in the two forecasts. So this might be the one year where we can really kind of, at the end of the winter, we can kind of break it down and actually see where, what they came up with. But even those specific weeks where they pinpoint blizzardy conditions during a certain week, or they even stand by those. So we can actually look back and see how they did. But I feel like if you really want the most reliable information is going to come from the atmospheric science community, obviously, because we know that the oceanic circulations and oscillations have so much more impact than the sunspot activity, at least for what we know.
Meteorologist Cory Reppenhagen, open-minded, nice guy, much nicer about the Farmers Almanac than I am. I appreciate your insight, your open-mindedness, also some fascinating insight about the behind the scenes of the Farmers Almanac as well, that well, I think most meteorologists disparage, myself included. But Cory, as always, thanks for your time, for your insight, and again for speaking to the editor of the Farmers Almanac so many times as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to talk to you. And it's always great to talk to Peter Geiger as well. And I hope this year I'll interview him again, see what he comes up with.
All right, there you have it, Cory. Good luck and thanks again for joining us here on 9 News Plus.
All right, take care, bro.